Hi, Gail.
Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
Great. How about yourself?
Good. I just got one more thing I need to do here, so give me
Yeah,
a
yeah, no
sec.
worries. I just wanted to get over here early to make sure that everything was going okay.
Yeah, and I just tested my screen share, so I think we're good. Let me just do
Great.
one more of that, and so I'll check that out with you.
Yep.
Um,
And just to confirm, the pronunciation of your last name,
is Brager.
Brager. Okay.
Okay. Think of a Y, insert a Y
Yeah.
in there.
I assumed so much. I just wanted to make sure though.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I do a colloquium every fall for students with outside speakers, and I have a big note in my folder I bring, ask them about their name.
Yeah. And I also get into that habit because of my last name.
Yeah,
It's
so
been
how do you
butchered from
pronounce
time.
your last name?
Moke.
Moke. Okay, so
Yeah.
the G is kind of silent.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. I'm just gonna set up my windows here. And are you seeing the screen okay?
Yes.
All right. Wow. No problems there then.
Yeah, so we'll just give a few minutes for people to join in.
Okay. And how many people do you normally get for these?
It sort of depends according to what other meetings people have. Sometimes it's, a dozen or so.
Okay.
Other times it's a little more than that.
And I know some of my own colleagues are missing various meetings today because it's the first day of school for their young children. So that
Oh,
that may be the case too of getting excited about walking their kids to school in a new grade and a new class, which I think is the most adorable reason ever to miss a meeting.
there you go. That's a good positive spin on it, right? As opposed to they get the kids out of the house.
Right. No, it's a ritual. It's an important milestone when kids go to a new school. I'm seeing some smiles. Is anybody here in that situation? Their kids are starting school today, getting them out of the house, but also wanting to accompany them, trying to balance that. Or maybe I'm just seeing smiles from memories.
Yeah, more memories. It's a bit of a distant memory at this stage on my side, but they're starting, they're starting their undergraduate and masters and whatever, so it's just different phase.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
being an academic my whole life, my professional world is very seasonal with academic cycles, and I find that really interesting. I think rituals and seasons, whether they're climatic or behavioral, are really interesting. So anything that's a ritual like that, I think it's good. It sets a rhythm to our lives.
Okay. What do you think, Keen Dagmar? Should we start? Give Gail a good bunch of time to do
Yeah,
this?
it'll give Gail more time and more
Yeah.
more people will anyway either
Yeah.
join and catch the recording otherwise. So
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Thank you everyone for joining today's research connections as part of the Enliven Design sort of series. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gail Brager. Um, Gail has a PhD in mechanical engineering and is a professor of architecture at UC Berkeley in their Building Science, Technology, and Sustainability program. She also serves as director of the Center for the Built Environment, which is an industry and university collaborative research center with nearly 50 partners from the building within the building industry. Since joining the faculty 40 plus years ago, Professor Brager remains passionate about teaching and conducting research to help both planet and people by minimizing energy consumption while enhancing indoor environmental quality and occupant experience. She recently co-authored a book called Experiential Design Schemas, which seems to be what she is presenting today, which is the intersection of building and health sciences with architectural design and aimed at expanding the joy and nature connections in buildings. And this will be at the heart of what she shares with us today, which I know I personally am excited to see. So, Gail, please take it away.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this series. I was very impressed with the encoding experience event that I participated in. I'm delighted to see Autodesk's commitment to building a community of people interested in centering human experience in their work. So I'm hoping that today's conversation is just one step in maybe cultivating more collaboration between Autodesk and my research group at UC Berkeley. And I encourage all of you to think about how what I present today sparks your imagination for research ideas, and we can perhaps talk about those during the Q&A at the end. So the way I'm going to organize my talk is I'd like to give you an introduction to the Center for the Built Environment, which is an industry university collaborative research center, and it'll set some context for my own journey. And then I'm going to talk about the links of nature, architecture, experience, frameworks for thinking about this, and how this leads to suggestions for research that is needed. And then the bulk of my talk will be about the Experiential Design Schemas book, how it's structured, selected schemas. But that middle part is actually part of the book as well. It comes from some of the introductory chapters. So with that, let's get started. So the Center for the Built Environment is really my professional family, and it really does have a family feel. We're very collaborative, we're very social. A number of us have been together for a very long time. The research team includes faculty, full-time researchers, operations staff, postdocs, visiting scholars, and of course, students. And our mission is to improve the performance of the built environment through collaborative research. Now, our work has always been about creating buildings that are healthy for both planet and people. We have a very broad research portfolio that you see here that examines strategies and technologies for both building design and operation. We think that's really important because we need to address existing buildings. And we're always looking at how can we simultaneously reduce energy use and carbon emissions, good for the planet, and also enhance indoor environmental quality and occupant well-being, good for people. So our methods include simulations, laboratory studies, field studies, and in addition to our scholarly publications, which is the classic, output for academics, our research is always very applied, and so we are trying to impact the building industry in a variety of other ways through developing tools and resources, improving codes and policies that enable sustainable solutions, and of course, developing next generation sustainability leaders. I love wearing the hat of a mentor and an educator. Many of our graduates go on to be leaders in companies. I said we were a collaboration with industry. We have nearly 50 industry partners that by design represent diverse segments of the building industry. So architects, engineers, contractors, manufacturers, utilities, government organizations, large building owners. So it creates this network of people who create their own collaborative relationships. Our meetings, are a great opportunity to expand this family spirit and have this networking among thought leaders in the field that where they can step away from particular projects where there are often competitors, and here they come together to support and guide research on topics relative to their businesses. And many are involved directly in the research itself. Now, we could give a whole series of presentations just on our tools, which I know are near and dear to the interests of Autodesk. that's not my purpose today. So instead, I just wanted to offer you the list here and a link at the bottom where you can find them all. We've been creating tools for over 20 years. They're probably not at the level of sophistication that you do at Autodesk. Some of them are very refined, some of them are more scrappy, but the whole idea is to get them out there in the industry so that they can make a difference in the world. And these tools are frequently based on the needs and interests of our CBE partners and other stakeholders. We take advantage of feedback from all of these groups. Some of them come out of a major research effort where we may have a grant that is specifically about creating a tool, but then we put it out there for public consumption. Hold on, there we go. So while the work of CBE has always been to link energy performance with human response, and my own background in engineering, my work has always been very technical. I think the work we're doing in CBE is really important. But here's my time for a little bit of a confession here. I've always felt that while I really value and respect and continue to work on everything that CBE does, I've often felt that something was missing, that we were relying too heavily on conventional and exclusively technical methods of assessment and presentation, and kind of missing these more vital, nuanced descriptions of what it means to create soulful architectural experiences and how nature plays a big part of that. So while I was trained in engineering, and that's the way my brain works, the book I'm going to talk about today was really a journey in me getting out of my own comfort zone and try a new way of making an impact, to use the research from CBE and from others towards communicating more directly to the design community about how to create meaningful architectural experiences. So the book is about how architecture is the link between the outdoor natural environment and the indoor environment, and how all of our senses are affected by creating these stronger nature connections. And I love the way Adlin Darling Design uses intentions about human experience as the starting point for much of their work, and particularly the way they describe this project. They say it was designed, quote, to promote personal renewal and well-being, where landscape and architecture integrate to replenish and invigorate the spirit. Wow, I wish more architects were talking about their projects like that. So I think we all know what architecture is. I want to now explore a little bit deeper what I mean by these ideas of nature, environment, and experience. So why is nature important? Some of you may have heard the term biophilia, which refers to humans' innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Philia meaning love, so our basic love of nature. And you may have also heard of biophilic design, which is an approach to architecture that seeks to strengthen those nature connections. So there's several theories about why and how nature affects people. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but in brief, the 4 diagrams on the top illustrate what's called attention restoration theory, which is about the cognitive benefits of nature, and the 4 diagrams on the bottom illustrate stress reduction theory, which is more about the physiological and emotional benefits of nature. And one of the things I love about these theories, and what I emphasize with students, is we need to dive deeper into the why things matter when they affect human response, and that human response is on so many different levels. It's the cognitive, the physiological, the emotional, psychological, and how all of those interconnect. So I also want to unpack what I mean by environment. So here I'm focusing on sensory space, those aspects of the physical environment that affect our sensory organs. And I love these examples because in many ways, these are spaces that are in part defined not by their geometry alone, but defined by their strong sensory qualities. So people huddled in the shady side of the Spanish Steps in Rome, or standing under this petal structured ceiling of a light filled atrium at Zaha Hadid's Cultural and Art Center in China, or if any of you have been in Pike Market in Seattle, you move from the distinct smells of the flower section to the fish section. So these are spaces that are clearly defined by our olfactory experience, or in the bottom right, this unique resonance of sound in this luxurious wine cellar and tasting room. So when architects design, they're more commonly thinking about space in terms of geometry and dimensions, but I am proposing that we need to think about space in terms of their sensory qualities. So with that, I'd like you to just imagine for a moment with me, what would life be like if we ate the same foods at every meal, never experienced weather or the sky's changing light, heard only a constant monotone sound with no music or bird songs, and life was devoid of art to delight the visual senses? Now, I think we could all agree that would be awful. But that's essentially what we're doing in our indoor environments when we design for static, uniform, neutral conditions in our buildings. And this is what I call experiential monotony, and there is nothing pleasurable about it. And the irony is that it's incredibly energy intensive to achieve this. But it doesn't have to be this way. Our book begins with 5 ideas for how we can design to create uplifting human experience, to move from common practices, what we call conventional realities, that I want to emphasize start with good intentions, but fall short of these richer experiential possibilities. So in brief, we call these conventional realities, 1, the neutrality fallacy. This is where sensory neutrality is seen as the ideal. Success is defined as simply no one complains or even notices the sensory environment. Instead, we advocate that instead of neutrality, why don't we think about vitality as the experiential target? 2, we see people becoming progressively disconnected from nature as we spend increasing amounts of our time indoors. So we advocate for buildings to reconnect us to an affinity with nature. A lot of our schemas are very nature-based. 3, what I call the conditioning monarchy. This is where centralized lighting and HVAC systems rule, right? And occupants have very few abilities to control their interior environments. So instead, we advocate for buildings to move towards a democracy of control that empowers individual agency and adaptive opportunity, and move us away from what I refer to as space-based to more people-based conditioning strategies. And all of these problems have led to occupants becoming increasingly addicted to air conditioning, where year by year, our tolerance to live without it decreases. So yes, we need air conditioning, but I think it could be used more appropriately when and where needed, and augmented with the healthy delight of more variable sensory experiences. And finally, all of these conventional realities are supported, unfortunately, by the prevalence of universal standards, where the underlying assumption that we're all the same ends up actually making a significant percentage of us unhappy. So while challenging, I would love to see standards that promote differential flexibility, that somehow allow us to move towards adapting to universal and regional diversity. All right, so next, what do we really mean by experience? So experience, this notion is really hard to pin down. It's hard to talk about. It's hard to find the right language for. So the book spends quite a bit of time talking about this, far beyond what we have to cover today. It's essential part of a class I teach in the fall, starting in a couple weeks, called Sensory Space, to really just give people a new language for talking about experience. So now I'm just going to offer a really brief introduction to some of the ways we try to provide a language for talking about experience, but there's much more in the book. Um, and as I talk about what I mean by experience, I'm going to be just inserting 5 examples among the many areas we identify where research, I think, really tends to under-examine precisely the questions for which a knowledge-based designer wants answers. And I believe that a lot of these research needs address what many refer to as the energy comfort nexus, what I'm trying to illustrate in these beautiful diagrams, how we need solutions that simultaneously reduce energy and improve comfort to create healthy buildings. And I'm going to close the presentation with even more suggestions than these 5, so I hope to hear your ideas as well. So in thinking about how to make sense of the many ways that the body and mind respond to inhabiting architecture, we look both at theory and also the science of how we experience environmental conditions, even while knowing this is only going to give us part of the story. So many human experiences of the environment start with sensation. The stimuli in our environment are first processed by our sensory receptors, which then send signals to particular brain regions. So that initial response might be purely physiological, registering as a sensation, right? Hot, cold, loud, quiet. But designers probably are more interested in perception, how people feel about these sensations. Are they annoying or pleasurable, negative or positive? So this idea of unpacking the difference between sensation and perception, how we interpret the information processed by the senses, is a really important part of the language we use. So that leads me to one research need. I think this audience is well aware that most researchers in our field bring expertise and focus on single sensory systems, be it light, olfactory, thermal, or acoustic. But we're also probably, everybody here on the call, well aware that our sensory systems don't work in isolation. And the feelings, the memorability of a place are going to be a result of an integrated multisensory experience. So another way of thinking about this integration is this reinterpretation of Maslow's hierarchy, where our basic needs start at the bottom. And this highlights another research need, that most of our research talks about reducing the negative, which is represented in the bottom 2 levels, but we really need to move towards how do we enhance the positive. So just using the thermal environment as example, the lowest level, the goal here is simply to avoid heat and cold stress. Necessary but not sufficient, I call that. It's often the basis for occupational safety and health standards. It's important for creating guidelines for resilient buildings to be habitable in the event of power outages during natural disasters. Critically important. Now, our buildings are generally operated to meet the next level, another area of significant CPE research. So many of you might be familiar with the ASHRAE thermal comfort zone, specifies conditions in which 80% of the occupants will find the conditions acceptable. You know, important but not necessarily very aspirational. If you are a manufacturer or a developer of tools, if Autodesk set their goal that only 20% of your customers didn't like your products, you probably wouldn't be as successful as you are. But that's about as aspirational as we get in our buildings. So we think there's a need to really think about these higher aims. And one premise of my book and much of my teaching is that one of the keys to moving upward in this hierarchy is to create buildings that provide rich, variable, multisensory environments that connect us to the natural rhythms of climate and other attributes of nature. Now, environmental variability can be thought of spatially, either when a particular room is non-uniform in light or sound, or temporally, as the different sensory qualities in space change over time, or a person moves between spaces. We thought that this language of variability was really vague. So we developed this diagram in the book, and I use it a lot in the teaching as a conceptual framework to organize these multiple kinds of spatial and temporal variability. So the columns represent physical environmental controls, first divided into uniform and non-uniform conditions. And then each pair is divided further into columns that are steady state or dynamic in time. The rows represent 3 experiential scales of a person. So in the top 2 rows, a person's relatively stationary and then can experience conditions locally or asymmetrically on their body, or they could be immersed in the same conditions across the whole body. And then the very bottom row represents whole body experiences when a person moves between spaces. And then the colored illustrations within the cells represent thermal experiences. There can be analogies for other senses as well. I'm not going to go into details for all of those, but your eye might go to situations such as standing on a warm or cool floor, or experiencing interior or perimeter zones that are connected differently to climate. So our hope is that such a framework of thinking about time and space can be used by both designers and researchers to be more intentional about generating experiential diversity. But one of the problems is that historically, much of research has really only focused on whole body, uniform, steady state conditions. So one of the research needs is illustrated in this matrix that instead of just those red squares where most of the research focuses on, we really need a lot more research investigating the rest of this matrix, which is actually a better representation of the complexity that people experience on a daily basis. And we also need much more research, at least in the world of thermal comfort, going back to this idea that thermal neutrality is the ideal, that it's the absence of negativity. What if our goal was that we do notice the environment, and that these variations in this matrix, the idea is to have subtle variations that bring us delight, not to annoy us. So variation, by definition, does not mean negativity. Those variations can either be positive or negative, and we need more research on how they can bring us these more positive and nuanced experiences. Which brings me to one of my favorite words, alesthesia. Now, alesthesia can be thought of as the physiological basis for thermal delight. And it arises from this dynamic component of thermoreceptors in our skin. It means that the best potential for sensory pleasure comes from having some degree of variability or contrast, either over time, what we call temporal alesthesia, or across different parts of our body, spatial alesthesia. And we created this illustration to better describe this concept and how it might lead to design and research implications. So the top bar represents the ambient environment, moving from neutral in the center to more extreme cold and hot at the ends. The second bar is the contrast or corrective stimulus, also moving from neutral to opposite extremes at the ends. And then the third bar shows that the greater the difference between the ambient environment and the contrast, the greater potential for alesthesial pleasure. And the illustrations at the bottom, the extremes at the end, are hopefully familiar to us. A hot tub on a cold night, jumping into a cool mountain river on a hot day. The illustrations at the very center are really simple examples. If you hold a warm cup of coffee on a cool day, that's pleasurable. But holding that exact same temperature cup of coffee on a hot day, not so much. Or a breeze from a desk fan on a warm day. Now, the architectural opportunities, I think, fall in the middle of both sides. These are where design and research opportunities for more moderate examples of alesthesia in our built environment are plentiful. Now, I think an important aspect of design for alesthesia is to give people personal control and choice of that variability. And this is also an important research need for the idea of neuro-inclusive design, so that buildings can respond to the needs of individuals rather than just catering to the average. So this fifth need about moving us from centralized to personal control, I think gives us both opportunities to design for neurodiverse individuals, and at the same time opportunities to provide variability that gives everybody on the spectrum delight. So now I'm going to pivot to giving you an overview of the book. This is the table of contents. The cover image is the meditation hall in the Museum San in Korea, designed by the Japanese architect Tadao Ando, and he describes it as a place to discover oneself. Again, a very inward reflection. And I love how the light that comes into this dome structure, it comes from this thin arch-shaped skylight, and the angle of light and the resulting ambiance changes throughout the day. So there's some temporal variability. The book is organized into 5 chapters. After an introductory chapter, chapter 2 uses philosopher Ken Wilber's integral theory as a framework for architectural experience. Chapter 3, called Excited by Evidence, is where I get to nerd out a bit and talk about the science of our sensory systems, focusing on response to variable environmental stimuli. And chapter 4 is really the heart of the book, and it's organized by these 6 subsections that I will describe in a moment. But first, what is an experiential design schema? This is the simple idea that we're trying to organize form and space to intentionally orchestrate environmental conditions in a way that creates a very specific and positive human experience. So we've developed 45 experiential design schemas for the work, and each one is presented in this consistent 4-page format, a pattern, if you will, where pages 1 and 2 include a description of the experience and a couple of elegant precedents. Pages 3 and 4 include related supporting evidence, design guidelines, and original drawings and diagrams showing both. And we organize these by these 6 kinds of what we call distributions of conditions, whereas many books about experience traditionally may organize chapters by light and thermal and acoustic, but in this idea that they're all integrated, that many of our experiences, we can't really isolate those separately. So instead, we created this new framework, a new language of contrast, gradients, rhythms, fluxes, sequences, and narratives, which is more about how those elements of variability, how things are distributed in space and time, might then affect our overall experience. We have many of these matrices. I'm a big fan of a good matrix. This is the primary one that shows how the 45 schemas are grouped first by these 6 categories shown in columns, but we also categorize them by different scales that range from materials to whole buildings. And scale is important because experiences happen at scale, and we also design at scale. We also have different matrices where these 45 schemas are grouped by the variability matrix I showed earlier. We have another one where it's also grouped by some of the traditional elements of light and sound. So they're like navigational roadmaps. Whatever way you're thinking, you can go through it, and they're like graphic tables of contents to help you figure out which ones might be relevant. Now, the book is richly illustrated with about 170 photos of projects representing experience across a wide range of scales and settings, from residential to public places and civic to everyday spaces. And there are about 130 diagrams in the book. And these are examples of just the three types we generated. Our diagrams were generated to either show conceptual ideas. I already showed you a couple of those, the biophilic theories and the variability matrix. We have a lot of research findings that we redraw all of them, not only so we have a common language, but as you likely know, scholarly publications, research findings can be very busy, and we're trying to really bring out what is the primary finding from that original research that we want to help people's eyes focus on. And then the third category is a number of design typologies and diagrams to try to translate that experience to, well, what can you do about it? How can you actually incorporate these in your design? So now I am first going to take a sip of coffee. And next, I'm going to take you on a very short tour of a few of the schemas that I get particularly interested in and the students have found really compelling. So I'll organize them by these distributions of conditions. Contrast, the first one. These are opposing conditions that are experienced simultaneously or in rapid succession. These examples are related to a schema we call Engage the Rain, which I love. It's very multi-sensory. It's about the idea of providing some degree of shelter, whether you're occupying either indoor or perimeter outdoor space, while still allowing one to engage the sounds, the moisture, the breezes. So rather than, oh, it's raining, we have to escape indoors, why don't we create ways to engage with that experience? Haptic connection is a schema about designing for thermal pleasure or alesthesia across different parts of the body at the same time through conductive contact. So the Senat Salus Town Hall by Alvar Aalto has these brick benches that are warmed by hydronic heaters beneath, and it creates this direct heating of the body in contrast with cooler window pane that produces a pleasure of a warm seat and a cooler upper body. And some of you may have seen in the past that CBE has been doing research on these heated and cooled chairs that are very energy efficient. They provide separate controls, both heating and cooling in the seat and the back. And it's all about this people-based conditioning the body rather than the ambient environment. And our research has shown that these chairs produce incredibly high levels of satisfaction with very low energy use. And as part of our research to support this, we've done a lot of body thermal sensitivity mapping of receptors, showing how they vary significantly across different parts of the body. So this haptic experience really depends on which body parts are experiencing cold or warm surfaces. So the hands, the feet, the buttocks are most sensitive to cold, predominantly contributing to our whole body cold discomfort. So that means that localized heating of these areas in a cold environment are going to be particularly delightful. And in comparison, the face is actually more sensitive to warm environments. So therefore, when you're feeling overheated, cooling around the head with a gentle breeze is going to be more effective. So the next distribution, gradients, this is about relatively smooth transitions between one condition and another. So this schema we call Shades of Brilliance, illustrated by Perez Art Museum. There's a public veranda covered with an expansive shading, connecting a park on one side with bay views on the other, and it creates a gradient from full sun to partial shade to full shade, all depending on the time of day, but all generally within one's field of perception, with movable furniture that allows people to choose the situation they prefer. An example of an acoustic gradient schema is euphonic water. This one I love. It's about creating this gradient of both sounds and coolness that intensify closer to the source. And a great example is the well-known Paley Park, one of the first vest pocket parks in the middle of New York City, which provides this oasis where the soothing sound of its waterfall masks the surrounding street life noises. And just as a quick example of some of the research evidence that we looked for where we could find evidence of the cognitive impacts of water sounds, don't have time to go into it in a lot of detail, but the left graph is showing the C-score, a metric that's about ideation originality, and it's shown that among 7 different sound conditions, water engendered the most original creative thinking. And then the right is showing urban soundscape semantic profiles that, in addition to water being the most pleasurable, the researchers also studied the water's psychoacoustic characterizations of loudness, sharpness, roughness, fluctuation, strength, to understand exactly what kinds of water sounds might create what kinds of experiences. Now, another gradient schema, this one is named after the Greek god of the gentle west wind. Zephyr spectrum is about creating a range of breezy and calm conditions that allow people adaptive choice to move between or modify conditions they might find pleasurable. And this hospital in Singapore does it through a variety of courtyards and external walkways around room balconies, louvered walls, operable jalousie windows in the patient rooms. It's a pretty rare example of a naturally ventilated hospital. So the next distribution, rhythms, is about allowing occupants to experience the natural cycles of nature. It's about connecting people to daily and seasonal cycles, an important part of biophilic design. Now, these pictures from a home in Greece are connected to the dawn and dusk schema, which is about having rooms that intentionally orient people to the east and the west so that they can experience the light and color transitions around sunrise and sunset. And I expect many of you know this important relationship between the physical and experiential of how the natural dynamic rhythms of daylight affect our circadian health, that it's about both how light intensity gradually shifts from low in the early morning, higher as the day progresses, lower again in the evenings, but it's also about how color temperature varies from being lower or warm red when the sun is rising and higher or cool blue at noon. So these are the daily changes that affect hormone production, suppressing melatonin, increasing serotonin during midday, vice versa in the evening. And this has a really important effect on our alertness, our sleep-wake cycles, mood, and many other biological functions. So the schema circadian space follows these patterns of natural lights. These precedents show 2 different scales. New York loft has light-colored surfaces and sheer privacy curtains on the windows, but has this double layer of curtains around the bed. And so you can create this dark sleeping area with a lighter living area, really nice for supporting people with different sleep habits. And then the example on the right at the commercial scale, the Federal Center South is in a high latitude, Seattle in the winter. People need their circadian stimulus while they're at work. So it's really important to create these brighter spaces through atrium and perimeter side lights that allow people to get this stimulus while they're still at work. So while the circadian spaces schema is about natural light, biorhythmic radiance is about patterns of electric lighting that mimic the intensity and the timing and the color to harmonize with bodily cycles. And there's a lot of opportunities for different controls and programming sequences for this dynamic electric lighting to respond to the changing daylight conditions when you don't have access to the windows. Now, in this last category, our interest in air movement and fans and natural ventilation is a really important part of CBE research. So I wanted to show you 2 schemas in this category. So one of them, integrating HVAC and natural ventilation, is the schema cooling conversions. So this is our name for what's otherwise been called mixed mode buildings. It's a way of recognizing we don't have to have one or the other. We don't have to have either mechanically cooled or passive natural ventilation. There are ways to integrate them that consider the daily and seasonal climatic rhythms. And mixed mode cooling typologies are often described in these three ways. And it's about whether natural ventilation and mechanical cooling are occurring in the same or different spaces and times. Usually the typical response you get is, well, we can't have air conditioning on and the windows open at the same time. Well, that's just the concurrent scheme. And that doesn't happen very often. And when it does, it may only happen in some of the shoulder seasons. More commonly, we're seeing mixed mode strategies that have category B zoned schemes that might use natural ventilation in one area, air conditioning in another, or changeover schemes where you're switching from natural ventilation to air conditioning as conditions warm on a daily or seasonal basis. Now, this last category, no, it's not that, it's second last category, fluxes. These are continuously changing stochastic conditions perceived as random or chaotic. Now, think about like leaves blowing in the wind or the changing intensity of a rainstorm. I love this schema, current prehensions. It's a way of creating visual elements that alert us to the moving air. So the moving air is not just felt on the skin, but maybe we actually see them at these different scales, a kinetic facade animated by wind, or super light curtains that dance in the wind. Or this schema, melodic materials, is about bringing weather awareness by responding to rain and wind forces and translating their patterns into sound. So on the left is the Wind Museum in Korea, where the wind itself is the exhibit. How cool is that? It's got these wooden slats with small gaps between them where the wind can howl or whisper depending on the weather. And the rain hearing pavilion, which is designed for people to just simply sit and listen to the rain sounds on the tile roof or the stone floor or in the basin as it fills. Now, another example of systems integration that CBE does a lot of research on is integrating HVAC and fans. And we call this schema fans first. So the idea here is when you have ceiling fans and air conditioning, how do you affect the operation so that you can raise the air conditioning set points in combination with fans for fast acting comfort? So this diagram illustrates that. So instead of the conventional strategy of, oh, it's warm, let's turn on the air conditioning, usually to too low of a setting, where we're overcooling people and creating discomfort and using a lot of energy. Instead, the fans first strategy, you turn the fans on first, then gets a little warmer, you increase the speed, gets even warmer, yeah, turn on the air conditioning. But if you do that in concert with the air movement, the air conditioning set point can be a little bit higher, you're saving energy, and you're providing greater comfort control. Now, the CBE team created this ceiling fan design guideline that's associated with an online tool. And this decision tree is just one example of many design tools available in the work. And it helps designers figure out when and how to use fans, how to design them, how to create conditions where people can move around, create non-uniform conditions, and where that variability could be desirable. Now here's the final distribution sequence. Sequence is about people moving from one condition to another. Too often we're just thinking about a space and people are in that space. But our experience very much arises from how we move from one condition to another. So this schema, light and dark procession, is from the historic Hill House in Scotland, and it's where people move from this subdued, dark paneled entry hall into soft, diffuse, north facing stair lighting and into this bright, energized south side living space with larger windows, sunny window seat, daylit from all three sides. And this schema, aromatic transit and olfactory schema, is about using smells as we move from one place to another and how we deliberately create thresholds between indoor and outdoor space. Either this was beautiful wisteria passageway on the left, or on the right is a lobby designed by Habitat Horticulture, this living wall where there's these fragrant elements that change in the seasons, and it creates an entry experience both accessible by the public. This is a public a lobby, but also by employees as they move in and out of their workday. And my last schema, ingress transitions, is simply about what are all the multi-sensory experiences when you move from outdoors to in. And I think the Kimball Art Museum is a wonderful example of very thoughtfully choreographed sensory progressions from the relatively intense outdoors to the relatively restrained indoor environments. Now, thermal transitions can be intentionally abrupt, and that brings the kind of delight associated with anesthesia. But lighting transitions have to be done differently, right? Because the eyes react relatively slowly when moving from the bright exterior to dimmer interior illuminance. So visual adaptation requires extended time, incremental darkening, and that's expressed architecturally here in the Kimball Art Museum through longer travel distance and increasing sense of enclosure. So with that, I welcome questions. I also want to hear from you about what research you think is needed in this area. Here's just some prompts of some more aspirational research ideas that really arose while we were writing the book, doing things that we thought would be easy, and then we had an idea, and then we'd go and search for the evidence, and it wasn't always there. So I think that some of this is easier said than done. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I would now love to hear from you. And
Thank you, Gail.
Jeremy, tell me if you'd like me to stop sharing screen, if people want to have the gallery larger, or they can move the slide bar over.
I think either is
Okay.
fine. Maybe we'll give it a little bit of time with your contact information up at least.
Okay.
Thanks for a fascinating and comprehensive talk, Gail. Very thought-provoking. Are there any questions from the audience? Dagmara.
I can get us started.
Sure.
I was thinking, so when you were talking about the transformation from conventional realities and you talked about the neutrality fallacy, I was reminded of a conversation we just had in the team the other day when we were talking about this idea that maybe we could really design space to very specific individual preferences by building sort of systems that might simulate those specific preferences. But then we were also talking about, oh, but how do you combine this idea of maybe we can now understand very individual preferences and kind of keep them alongside the design with the simple reality that the space is being designed for a lot of people. And so, yeah, the natural fallback is to sort of just, well, let's not go in any specific direction. Let's just kind of make it okay for all, or what might the perception of okay be? And so I guess I was curious how you were thinking about this. Like, how do you convince people to move away from this neutrality thing, when they'll come back with arguments that, well, but I need to design a space that will suit
Yeah.
a large amount of unknown people.
That, I mean, you hit it. That is the challenge. And the fallback is to go to cookie cutter design, right? And just go, oh, comfort zone. Somebody's telling us what to do. Well, that's for 80% satisfaction, and we're barely meeting that. I think one of the directions I'm seeing designers go in the workplace, for example, is um, well, at one extreme is to move away from all assigned seating entirely. And I think that's starting to backfire where everybody can just sit wherever they want. And I think we're creating more of a hybrid approach where, yes, you might have your own desk because people want their own space, they want to personalize it, but you don't have to do everything you do in that one space. So you've got conference rooms, breakout spaces that are both small and large, right? So that in open plan, you're when you need to do heads down concentrated work, maybe you either are putting headphones on or moving to a small place, or you want to have a dynamic conversation with a few people, you've got spontaneous places that you can move to. So acoustically, which is one of the biggest complaints in office buildings, people are doing these different spaces so that you can accommodate different kinds of work that have different acoustic needs. Well, we could take that further to the other senses. The space that you're sitting in sedentary for long periods of time don't have to be the same thermal or lighting conditions as the corridors. We've used task ambient lighting. That becomes standard, right? Corridor circulation space can be dimmer. You have a light on your desk that you put it on and off when and where you need it. Because if you're doing paper-based work on a horizontal surface versus screen work on a vertical surface, your lighting requirements are completely different. So you can create an overall ambient lighting that's dimmer and then give people control. What if we did that thermally? We have more variability and conditions float over a wider range in the non-critical spaces. And then you give people control, over the thermal environment in their own space. Very low energy fans. Oh, I blurred. You might not be able to see that as well. Low energy fans, foot warmers, heated and cooled chairs. That's one example. Maybe you have conference rooms or workspaces that are slightly warmer, slightly cooler, that people can actually go to the space, and that maybe the colors and artwork in those spaces are representative of the warm and cool environment. So you're almost triggering where you're going and how that's associated with a variable thermal environment. I think the ideas of choice and control are absolutely key here, rather than designers dictating what people should and should not have and what they should and should not want.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm kind of hearing like maybe instead of trying to choose a look for all of the space, you almost just accept that you'll have multiple spaces with different looks, and then the people can choose where they want to do things and yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that can also be associated, be interesting with interior versus perimeter spaces, and view, because if you have view of nature and climate, there's a psychological expectation that happens there, and it's cold outside, it's warm outside, you're in a space that is connected to the natural climate versus your expectation of an interior space that that is all centrally controlled, and it might be the same year round, and you might have other spaces that are a little bit more climate and nature connected.
Good point.
I would love to hear from your experience doing research at Autodesk how this kind of work might be integrated into design tools or other research you're all doing. I would love to have more conversations about that. What do you think?
I,
Well,
you know, Gail, I was going to ask you exactly the same question. Um, so, you know, so there you go. I mean, which is great. I think there's a lot of opportunity to integrate these print, you know, concepts such as these into design tools. It's just it is obviously very complicated. I mean, one of the approaches we've kind of taken in the past has been around trying to boil these concepts down into a more, you know, sort of spatial principles about how things can connect to each other spatially, and then do some analyses during the design phase in order to surface those insights. But increasingly, we're focusing on understanding from, you know, using data around how people perceive space and looking at capturing large amounts of data to reflect these um, yeah, these nuanced situations. But it's complicated. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think we can do this?
Yeah, so I would love to after finishing the book, I've been thinking about what next. How does this have more of an impact? And I've been having so much fun using it in teaching because our students are friggin' amazing. So they give me ideas, but it is really complicated. If it wasn't complicated, we would have done it before. So I think there's two or at least two elements to your question. One is um, how do we understand how people respond to this variability? You know, the data side, how they perceive space, how they respond to this variability, so that we can integrate into the tools. And we don't know enough there. And CBE has been doing a lot of work in this area. We still don't know enough. Some of you might know about the Advanced Berkeley Comfort tool. We have two different thermal comfort tools, but the ABC, the Advanced Berkeley Comfort tool, is really about breaking the body down into all of these different parts so that we can do the asymmetric and temporal experience. And that's probably one of the more sophisticated tools out there, but we're much better at doing the research and developing the scrappy tools than turning them into the sophisticated tools. So that may be an area of collaboration. And then the second category broadly is about representation. So it's one thing to know how we feel, a lot of gaps there. But another thing is to how do we, given that all of our tools are visual, how do we represent thermal and acoustic and olfactory experiences? And this is where my students have been going wild, and we do some assignments in the class, and they have so much fun. They are so much more creative and technically sophisticated than I am. One of the reasons I love teaching is making smarter people even better. Is And so we do exercises where they try to map out multisensory experiences. Either they do it in two ways: one through observation, exercises where they go out, experience spaces, and try to use tools, visual representation tools for mapping it. And then later in the class, when they're doing design exercises, we do something called experiential programming, which I think is really important, setting intentions about what you want those feelings, those experiences to be. And you may or may not reach them. You may or may not measure them and get back into your buildings in the end, but you're really not going to achieve them if you're not intentional in the beginning about at least what you are hoping to have, so that your conversations can then be anchored in those intentions. And to me, this idea of experiential programming and visual representation of those experiential goals, I think that's a huge area for contributions while we're waiting for the science to catch up on how we actually perceive space. Let's be intentional about our experiential goals. Um, so it could be, if some of you are interested, I'm teaching the class again this fall. If any of you are interested, I can share a syllabus with you if you want to come see what the students are doing and be in person or remote crits, and just they are so creative, and they help spark my imagination.
I'm just noticing we are at time.
Oh,
I
shoot.
guess part of the question becomes whether you have extra time, Dr. Brager, to
No, I
field
actually
some more
have another
questions or
meeting that I'm a little late for, but that's
okay.
okay. I would love, so let's call this a day. I
Yes.
think this is as I said, I hope that this is the start of a conversation. I was so invigorated by the encoding experience event. I was so excited by what that Autodesk is trying to do this. Um, I'm very grateful you invited me to share more of my ideas. And I just think there is so much overlap. And I hope that we can continue these conversations about where we can find alignment, whether it's teaching, whether it's, you know, collaboration with CBE as a research group, whether it's just more cocktail parties. I don't know. But I just see so much alignment with what we're all trying to do. I would love to have more of these conversations.
Great. I'm sure a lot of
Definitely.
us would as well. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Gail.
Great. Okay. Thank you
All
again
right.
for inviting me.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Take
Gail.
care.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.